Alright, yan. Magandang araw mga kabatas natin. At welcome sa isa namang live stream, mga kabatas natin. Ang weird lang, no? Kasi ito sa ABC News In-Depth, mga kabatas natin. This is an Australian public broadcast service na feature yung Marcos versus Duterte. Ang title nito mga kabatas natin, no? Marcos versus Duterte, the Philippines' biggest family feud. If you're listening. Alam niyo mga kabatas, pag nag-away ang cocaine at fentanyl, robust ang makikinabang. Yan. No nonsense. Sige, pagbibigyan kita dyan. Mga kabatas natin, ang problema ko dito talaga, mga kabatas natin. Pati yung mga foreigners, no? Mga taga-Australia na. Ito, public broadcast service ito. News agency nila, mga kabatas natin. Napapansin na yun. Yung mga Pilipino, mga kabatas natin, nakikipagbardagulan pa rin. Pag titignan nyo kasi dito, mga kabatas natin, yung lagi kong binabanggit sa inyo, now let's look at the end. The purpose. Ano ba yung purpose nitong pag-aaway na ito? Sige nga! Ano ba yung purpose ng pag-aaway na ito? Mag-i-improve ba yung bansa natin kapag nag-aaway sila? I bet, mga kabatas natin, after this feud, nagsayang lang ulit sila ng oras na imbes ginamit nila sa paglilingkod bayan. Di ba? Oh, maraming natuwa sa iyo. No nonsense. Oh. Yan. I-flash lang natin yan. Di ba? They just want power. Both families want power. But if they already wielded the power. Itong mga Duterte, nagkaroon na sila ng kapangyarihan. They are still in power right now through Sara Duterte. Si Bongbong Marcos and the Marcoses, they already had power and they are also in power right now through Bongbong Marcos. The first and second highest public officers of the Philippines. Pointless bickering, sabi ni Sheena Sabile. Totoo yan. Tignan nyo, oh! Nasa Australia tayo, oh!
In January this year, a big rally was held in Davao City, the second largest city in the Philippines. It was billed as a prayer meeting, but there was a lot more swearing, sexy dancing, and threats than you traditionally see at a prayer meeting. Also, no actual religion.
Loko rito, Australia, ano ito? Ayan, prayer meeting daw. Prayer meeting, pero, tignan nyo.
As a prayer meeting, but there was a lot more swearing, sexy dancing, and threats than you traditionally see at a prayer meeting. Also,
mas maraming pagmumura daw at saka sexy dancing. Yan nakikita nyo. Kasi sa prayer meeting. Ano ba yan?
no actual religion.
Nakakahiya, sabi. Sabi ko sa'yo, pinagtatawanan na tayo eh. Oh my goodness. Let's go.
Religious leaders were present. The mayor of Davao City, BATASnatin, was the first to talk.
Duterte!
And the whole thing kind of became a sort of a roast of the current president of the Philippines, Bongbong Marcos.
Ni-roast daw yung current president of the Philippines. Grabe, di ba? Tingnan nyo naman yung sinasabi nila sa politika dito sa Pilipinas.
BATASnatin called on President Bongbong Marcos to resign. On top of that, he seemed to threaten Marcos and his family by reminding him of leaders who were famously murdered.
From now on, before you go to bed, think of the Romanovs, Benito Mussolini and his wife. And maybe you'll reconsider the direction that you are taking.
Yung foreigner yung nagsabi tignan nyo. Ano sinabi ng foreigner?
Leaders who were seemed to threaten President Bongbong Marcos to resign. On top of that, he seemed to threaten Marcos and his family by reminding him of leaders who were famously murdered.
From now
Leaders who are famously murdered.
on, before you go to bed, think of the Romanovs, Benito Mussolini and his wife, and maybe you'll reconsider the direction that you are taking.
Then Bast's dad
Na.
Rodrigo, who used to be the president, suggested that Bongbong Marcos was addicted to cocaine.
Isipin niyo mga kabatas natin, yung kadramahan na yan, no? Tapos yung kadramahan na nangyayari, parang sobrang low IQ, low level. Hindi yung mataas na klase. Hindi intelligent type.
Bong Marcos, may drug addict tayo na presidente. Putang inang yan.
This all understandably made news across the Philippines, and it turned into a bit of a finger-pointing tit-for-tat between the current and former presidents. Marcos said that Duterte was out of his mind because he's addicted to prescription painkillers.
I think it's the fentanyl. Fentanyl.
Tama nga, fentanyl. Sino nagsasuffer tayo? Pinagtatawanan na rin tayo ng ibang bansa.
Is the strongest painkiller that you can buy. I hope his doctors take better care of him.
This is all pretty unedifying stuff. A bit reminiscent of...
Ano sabi?
Care of him.
This is all pretty unedifying stuff. A bit reminiscent of what's going on in America at the moment with Biden and Trump. But here's the wild part.
Ito, hindi ko naintindihan yung sinabi niyo. Australian kasi. Here's the wild part.
Duterte's family and Marcos's family are intricately linked. Sometimes they're rivals, sometimes they're allies. They are the Montagues and Capulets of the Philippines. They are, depending on who you ask, the country's most famous statesmen, thieves, murderers, or heroes.
They are the country's
Montagues
famous.
and Capulets of the Philippines. They are, depending on who you ask, the country's most famous statesmen, thieves,
Statesman, thieves,
murderers, or heroes.
murders,
The
heroes.
Marcoses and Dutertes have tussled for power for nearly 60 years. And now
60 years. Marcos-Duterte. Sige. Tignan niyo yung nangyayari sa politika natin. Actually, I think part of this is the dynasty. If you taste power, you crave for it. Di ba?
Now, the Dutertes are suggesting they might make their home island of Mindanao a separate country. Today, the story of the feud literally threatening to tear the Philippines apart. I'm Matt Bevan, and this is If You're Listening.
Nakakatawa na lang tayo, no?
The entanglement of these two families goes back generations. It was 1965, and Ferdinand Marcos Sr., a handsome and articulate lawyer, was running for president. Ferdinand was the patriarch of the Marcos clan, Bongbong's dad, the first in the family to run for president. He campaigned
Pero di ba Aquino ang kalaban nito? Hindi naman Duterte?
24 hours a day.
I've done away with a vicious habit of sleeping.
He was backed by his wife, Imelda, a national style icon.
Mrs. Marcos also sings.
Now, Philippines politics in the 60s were pretty rough.
National elections in the Philippines are probably the jazziest, the most uninhibited, the most corrupt, and probably the most violent.
The most corrupt and the most violent. Ganun pa rin kaya?
any election campaigns I've ever heard of.
A smear
1965 yun, mga kabatas natin, ha? Most corrupt, most violent.
campaign was running against Ferdinand Marcos, and it was next level.
Why is it being done, do you think?
Because they have no issues against me. Valid issues.
Ads are running accusing him of straight-up murder.
I personally believe that Mr. Ferdinand Marcos killed my father.
It was very Inigo Montoya. Marcos was
Sino nakapanood nun? Inigo Montoya. Sino nakapanood nun? Inigo Montoya. Doon na lang tayo para on a lighter note, The Princess Bride, panoorin nyo yun. Pero lumang-lumang kanta na yun, I'm Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die. So, yeah. Ang problema kasi dito, mga kabatas natin, we never learn. Diba? 1965 pa. The most violent, most corrupt elections.
was never proven to be a murderer, but the Philippines was full of gun violence. It really was like the Wild West.
You see, about 25% of the people of Manila carry a gun. Outside of drunkenness, the armed citizen of Manila is the biggest headache to the police force here, particularly around election time, when tempers are just a little on edge and trigger fingers itchier than usual.
Ferdinand Marcos promised to tackle all of this. He was confident of winning.
I think it's going to be a landslide.
And it was. But there was one part of the Philippines which really seemed to not like him. The southern
Ito siguro yung feud. Mindanao.
island of Mindanao. This island, home to 1 in 3 Filipinos, is the place where the dispute between the Dutertes and Marcoses took root.
Like elsewhere, the nation's deep south is full of problems and lovely women.
That's ABC reporter Frank Bennett there. Yowza! What the Deep South had, apart from problems and lovely women apparently, was a lot of Muslims.
For the most part, the
Okay. Let's go.
Muslims are poor peasants and fishermen.
Despite the Philippines being majority Catholic, Mindanao and the smaller islands surrounding it were majority Muslim. But for the last 80 years, huge quantities of Christians have been moved.
Ayun, mga kabatas, I have to go na eh. Gusto ko pa sanang tuloy na lang natin. No? Ano nyo nga ito, yung mga ibang vloggers. Subukan nyo kaya ito. Nakakabitin. Pero I have to go. Nagre-ring yung phone. I have to answer.
Moving there, leading to
Sige,
conflict.
konti pa.
Their problems began in earnest after the Second World War, when Christian settlers in the northern Philippines began to move south in search of land.
Ano ba yung nito? Comments turned off, no? Tignan niyo dito. Duterte's challenge Marcos, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., Rodrigo Duterte, the brat. Ops, yun na yung susunod.
Brought with them a culture that had no place for Islamic traditions.
Ferdinand Marcos had polled poorly in Mindanao, so to win over the locals, he
Anong channel yan? ABC News In Depth. Ilalagay ko dyan. Ilalagay ko dito para panoorin nyo. Yan yung link.
invited the Mindanao governor to join his cabinet. The governor's name was Vicente Duterte. It was the first time the two families came together. Vicente
Oh, this is good! This is good. Yan, panoorin nyo. Panoorin natin, tapos let's talk about it. Yan, maraming salamat mga kabatas natin. At syempre, tulad laging sinasabi, matulog po tayo ng maimbing dahil alam natin na yung natutulog ng maimbing, siya yung laging panalo.